the most accurate kit car that ever existed, because every single part is for McLaren P1. This is a McLaren P1 that has never been to the McLaren.
The relationship between car manufacturers and YouTubers has always been a little complicated. On one hand, creators bring massive exposure, millions of views, younger audiences, and a global reach that traditional marketing can't always replicate. On the other, they operate outside corporate control, often modifying, rebuilding, or even criticizing vehicles in ways brands never intended. That tension is no longer subtle. When Freddy Tavarish Hernandez revealed that McLaren had effectively excommunicated his heavily damaged and rebuilt P1 hypercar, it signaled something bigger than a single dispute. It raised a question the automotive world can't ignore anymore. Who really controls a car after it's been sold? This isn't just about one YouTuber. It's about ownership rights, brand protection, intellectual property, and a growing clash between legacy automakers and a new generation of creators reshaping car culture in real time. Let's break it all down. The rise of automotive YouTube. Before car brands ever had to worry about YouTubers, they controlled the narrative almost completely. If you wanted to know whether a car was good, you read a magazine, watched a Top Gear segment, or trusted a journalist who had been invited carefully into the world of the manufacturer. Access was controlled. Information was filtered. And for the most part, the story of a car began and ended with the people who built it. Then YouTube happened. At first, it didn't look like a threat. Early automotive creators were simply enthusiasts with cameras, filming reviews in parking lots, talking through specs, sharing opinions that felt more personal than polished. But over time, something shifted. The production quality improved, storytelling got sharper, and most importantly, the audience grew. Creators like Doug DeMuro built massive followings by breaking down cars in a way that felt honest, detailed, and oddly entertaining. It was something deceptively simple. No corporate language or scripted press notes. Just quirks, features, and a clear opinion. For many viewers, it felt more trustworthy than traditional media. But reviews were only the beginning. A different corner of automotive YouTube was emerging, and it was one that didn't only talk about cars, but took them apart. Rebuild culture, as it would come to be known, introduced audiences to a side of the industry most people never saw. Salvage auctions, flood-damaged vehicles, insurance write-offs that were supposed to disappear quietly from the road. Creators like Freddy Tavarish Hernandez made a name by taking these broken, often abandoned machines and attempting what many thought impossible, bringing them back to life. And the best part? He didn't do this behind closed workshop doors. He was brave enough to make these attempts in front of millions of viewers. He recorded every mistake, every setback, every unexpected cost. It was all a part of the story, and people were drawn to it. There was something compelling about watching a car that had been written off by the system get a second chance. Think of it as a makeover. But rather than just fix the body, the entirety of the car was changed. But it wasn't just about the machine. It was about the process, the uncertainty, the risk, the idea that with enough time, skill, and persistence, even the most damaged vehicle could be restored. Then came creators like Rich Rebuilds, who pushed things even further, stepping into the world of electric vehicles, where repair is often less about mechanical skill and more about navigating software restrictions, proprietary systems, and limited access to parts. His work didn't just entertain. It exposed the growing tension between independent repair and manufacturer control. This was the point things started to shift from content to influence. Automotive YouTubers were no longer just documenting cars, they were shaping how people understood them. They showed the real cost of ownership, the hidden flaws, the long-term reliability issues that don't appear in a press release. They also showed something else brands weren't used to: what happens after the sale. Because once a car leaves the showroom, its story doesn't end. It evolves, it breaks, it gets modified, and increasingly, it gets documented. For manufacturers, this was unfamiliar territory. They were used to controlling first impressions like launch events, media drives, curated experiences. But YouTube extended the life cycle of a car's public image indefinitely. A single rebuild series could generate millions of views over months or even years, shaping perception in ways no marketing campaign could fully predict or control. At the same time, many brands initially embraced this new wave. They sent press cars to creators. They collaborated on content. They recognized the reach and relevance of these platforms, especially among younger audiences who were drifting away from traditional media. But there was always an underlying tension, because unlike journalists, YouTubers weren't bound by the same expectations. They didn't rely on continued access in the same way. They could take risks. They could criticize more openly. And in the case of rebuild creators, they could take a brand's most prized machines and reimagine them entirely, outside of corporate oversight. What started as a new form of car enthusiasm was slowly becoming something else. Something more independent, more unpredictable. And from the perspective of the brands watching this unfold, potentially uncontrollable. The McLaren P1 case. What happened? Now, let's jump right into the reason we're all here. To understand why the P1 situation escalated the way it did, you have to start with the car itself. The McLaren P1 isn't just any supercar. When McLaren introduced it, it was positioned as a technological statement, a hybrid hypercar designed to sit at the very edge of performance and engineering. Only around 375 units were ever produced, making it not just rare, but carefully curated. Every car was part of a legacy McLaren intended to protect. And unlike traditional supercars, the P1 wasn't purely mechanical. It combined a twin turbocharged V8 engine with an advanced electric motor system, creating a level of complexity that made it incredibly difficult to service, let alone rebuild outside of factory conditions. This wasn't a car you casually repaired. It was a car you entrusted back to the manufacturer, which is exactly why what happened next stood out. When Freddy Tavarish Hernandez acquired a heavily flood-damaged P1 through an auction, it immediately raised eyebrows. This wasn't a lightly used vehicle with cosmetic issues. This was a hypercar that had been written off, damaged to a point where most would consider it beyond practical recovery. But that was the point. Tavarish didn't just want to own a P alone, he wanted to rebuild it. And more importantly, he wanted to document every step of that process publicly. From the beginning, the scale of the project was clear. Flood damage is notoriously destructive, especially in modern vehicles where electronics play a central role. In a car like the P1, where hybrid systems, sensors, and software are deeply integrated, water exposure can compromise nearly everything, from wiring harnesses to battery systems to onboard computers. What followed was in no way a simple restoration. It was much closer to a full-scale resurrection. The rebuild process stretched across months, then years. It involved sourcing extremely rare components, many of which are not readily available on the open market. Unlike older cars, where parts can be fabricated or substituted, hypercars like the P1 rely heavily on proprietary systems. Certain components are tightly controlled by the manufacturer, making independent repair both difficult and, in some cases, controversial. And through it all, Tavarish documented everything. The failures, the unexpected costs, the moments where progress stalled. The trial and error involved in bringing a car like this back to life without direct factory support. For viewers, this level of transparency was part of the appeal. It showed not just the glamour of owning a hypercar, but the reality of maintaining, and in this case, rebuilding, one. But from a brand perspective, that same transparency can look very different. At some point during the project, McLaren reportedly issued a warning related to the use of its branding and the way the vehicle was being represented. While the exact details of the communication weren't fully public, the concerns were clear enough to interpret. A rebuilt P1, especially one that had suffered severe damage, does not represent the car as it was originally engineered. Any issues that arise during the rebuild, any performance limitations, any failures along the way, could be associated, fairly or not, with McLaren itself. And when that process is broadcast to millions of viewers, the stakes change. From McLaren's point of view, this wasn't just about one car, but about brand integrity. The P1 is a flagship product, a symbol of engineering excellence. Allowing it to be publicly rebuilt, modified, and potentially misrepresented without oversight introduces a level of risk that luxury manufacturers are not accustomed to accepting. There are also legal dimensions to consider. Branding, trademarks, and intellectual property are tightly protected, especially at the high end of the automotive market. When a creator monetizes content featuring a heavily modified version of a branded product, it raises questions about where ownership ends and brand control begins. But what makes this case different wasn't just the warning itself, it's what the rebuild represents. This wasn't a simple modification or customization. It was the complete revival of a car that, by most standards, was gone. And it was done outside the ecosystem McLaren built to maintain and service its vehicles. More than that, it was done publicly and successfully enough to capture massive attention. Which is why this moment kind of felt like a turning point. Because for the first time, a creator wasn't just reviewing or modifying a car, he was rewriting its story. And in doing so, he stepped into a space that car manufacturers have traditionally kept firmly under their control. To many, this wasn't an ordinary rebuild. It was a challenge, whether intentional or not, to who gets to define what a car is once it leaves the factory. Why car brands are pushing back. From the outside, it's easy to frame this as a simple conflict. Big corporations trying to silence independent creators. But from the perspective of the manufacturers, the situation looks very different. Because for car brands, especially at the luxury level, control is part of the product. Take a company like McLaren. When they build a car, they're selling an image, precision, exclusivity, engineering perfection. Every detail, from the way the car is unveiled to how it's serviced, is carefully managed to maintain that perception. And perception matters more than ever. A single viral video showing a flagship vehicle failing, struggling, or behaving unpredictably, even if it's due to improper repairs, can shape public opinion in ways traditional marketing can't easily counter. Viewers don't always separate the condition of a rebuilt car from the original engineering behind it. To many, a problem is simply a problem. So when creators take damaged, modified, or heavily rebuilt vehicles and present them to millions of people, brands see a risk, not just to accuracy, but to identity. Then there's the issue of intellectual property. Car manufacturers invest heavily in protecting their designs, logos, and proprietary systems. These aren't just aesthetic choices, they're legally protected assets. When a YouTuber features a car prominently, uses brand logos, and monetizes that content, it enters a complicated space. On one hand, the creator owns the physical vehicle. On the other, the brand still owns the identity tied to it, the name, the design language, and the technology embedded within it. When that identity is attached to content the brand didn't approve or oversee, it raises questions about where the boundaries lie. This becomes even more complicated with modern cars, which are no longer purely mechanical. Vehicles today are deeply integrated with software, encrypted systems, and proprietary tools. Companies like Tesla have been at the center of this shift, often restricting access to parts, diagnostic tools, and software updates. Independent repairers have pushed back, arguing for the right to fix and modify vehicles they legally own. This is where the broader right to repair debate comes in. Manufacturers argue that restricting access is necessary to protect intellectual property, to ensure safety, and to maintain quality control. Critics argue that it limits ownership, forcing consumers to rely entirely on official channels, often at higher costs. And safety is a key part of that argument. When a car is rebuilt outside of manufacturer guidelines, especially one as complex as a hypercar, there's no guarantee it will perform as intended. If something goes wrong, if there's an accident, or if a system fails, the brand's name is still attached to the vehicle, even if the manufacturer had nothing to do with the rebuild. That's a liability risk, both legally and reputationally. Because in the public eye, the distinction between factory-built and independently rebuilt isn't always clear. Then there's another concern, one that's less obvious, but just as important. Misinformation. Automotive YouTube thrives on experimentation, trial and error, figuring things out in real time. But when dealing with highly complex systems, hybrid drivetrains, advanced electronics, proprietary software, there's a risk that incorrect methods or incomplete fixes are presented as viable solutions. To an experienced engineer, the difference is obvious. To a general audience, it isn't. And when millions of people are watching, those misunderstandings can spread quickly. From the brand's point of view, this isn't about shutting down creativity or controlling every narrative. It's about managing risk in an environment they no longer fully control. Because once a car leaves the factory, it enters the real world. And now, that world is being documented, dissected, and broadcast in ways the industry was never originally designed to handle. So the pushback we're seeing is more calculated than random. And at its core, it comes down to one thing, not censorship, but control over how a product and the name attached to it is understood by the world. The YouTuber perspective, ownership versus control. From the creator's side, things look a bit more different. The argument feels a lot simpler. If you bought the car, it's yours. That's the foundation of the philosophy driving much of automotive YouTube. The idea that ownership should mean control, not partial control or conditional access, but full control. The freedom to modify, rebuild, experiment, and document the process without needing permission from the company that originally made it. For creators like Tavarish, the car isn't just a product, but a project. Something to be taken apart, understood, and, if necessary, rebuilt from the ground up. The value isn't just in the finished machine, but in the process of getting there. And that process is exactly what audiences connect with. Because where brands tend to present perfection, creators often show reality. The hidden costs, the unexpected failures, the small design flaws that only appear after months or years of use. It's a level of transparency that traditional automotive media rarely offers, not necessarily because they don't want to, but because they operate within a system that depends on access. YouTubers don't always have that constraint, so they show everything. When a rebuild goes wrong, it's part of the story. When a part fails, it's documented. When something turns out to be far more expensive or complicated than expected, the audience sees it in real time. And for many viewers, that honesty feels more valuable than a polished review. It also changes how people understand ownership. A car is no longer just something you buy and drive. It becomes something you maintain, repair, and potentially struggle with. The idea that even a hypercar can break, and that fixing it might not be straightforward, reshapes expectations in a way that benefits consumers, even if it makes brands uncomfortable. There's also a practical side to all of this. For many creators, this isn't just a hobby. It's a business. YouTube ad revenue, brand sponsorships, merchandise, and partnerships all contribute to an ecosystem where rebuilding cars can be financially viable. A single long-term project can generate content for months, even years. Every stage of the process becomes an episode. Every setback becomes a narrative point. In that sense, the car itself is only part of the value. The story around it is what sustains the channel. And audiences aren't just passive viewers in that story, they're participants. Comment sections often turn into collaborative spaces where viewers suggest solutions, share technical knowledge, or point out potential issues. In some cases, creators rely on this feedback to move projects forward. It becomes a kind of crowdsourced engineering, where thousands of perspectives contribute to solving a single problem. That dynamic is hard for traditional industries to replicate, because it's not controlled, it's not filtered, and it doesn't always align with official guidelines. This is where figures like Rich Rebuilds have become particularly influential. By documenting the challenges of repairing modern electric vehicles, especially those produced by companies like Tesla, he's helped bring the right to repair conversation into mainstream awareness. The argument isn't just technical, but philosophical. If consumers are expected to take full financial responsibility for a product, should they not also have full control over how it's maintained and repaired? For creators, the answer is obvious. They don't see themselves as undermining the industry. If anything, they see themselves as expanding it, exploring what happens to cars after they leave the showroom, pushing boundaries and making information more accessible to the public. In their view, they're not damaging the brand. They're actually revealing the full story. And that's where the tension really begins to take shape. Because what creators frame as transparency, brands can interpret as exposure. What feels like innovation on one side can look like loss of control on the other. And somewhere in between those two perspectives is the question that hasn't been fully answered yet. What does ownership really mean? In an era where even the things we buy aren't entirely within our control? And maybe that's really what this all comes down to. Not just McLaren, not just Tavarish, but a much bigger shift happening quietly in the background. Because cars are no longer just machines. They're software, data, branding, and identity. And the moment you buy one, you're stepping into a system that doesn't fully let go. What are your thoughts on this one? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.